Hello students, I hope that you might have gone through the prescribed syllabus for TYBA English. At the same time, you might have gone through the text and the literary background in the form of terms and concepts. I hope you have understood the syllabus in whole. At the same time, I hope, as I had suggested for reading the objectives that are aimed by the Board of Studies. I expect you to go through thoroughly the prescribed syllabus for the semester, and at the same time the reference books. Of course, there are some books that are available in our library. Those books are going to be extremely useful. If you find anything, any difficulty, you can contact me. You can write or text me a message. So it will be useful for you. Okay. This is online lecture, as we should be habitual to the new, say, innovative and technological methods of teaching. So uh, definitely this literature is going to be studied in paper number 8, that is 20th century British literature. British literature, at the same time, uh, the literature from English speaking world. At the same time, we can call it as a European literature. Europe, it stands for the conglomeration of all the nations that comes together. There are so many countries, so many nations, national boundaries, but we have only English literature. We don't have to study French literature, German literature, or any other Italian literatures alike. But British English literature. Why so? As you are going to study in literary criticism paper, literature brings out the true and realistic picture of the times it is produced. Literature brings us more closely to the society, to the living standard, socio-political conditions of the time, how the human beings lived in that particular era. So literature is a picture. It's a realistic picture of the contemporary world, whether it's novel, whether it's poetry, essay, or anything. The forms of literature that you might have studied in first year, or you have studied in second year, the forms of literature that becomes the part of literary studies. Modern literature is the another synonymous word for 20th century literature. The student must get acquainted with these terms, the terms that are extremely useful for our understanding. These terms definitely hints at some of the political conditions, some innovative and new technological conditions. At the same time, it hints at the new development that has occurred, whether it's a social development, political development, financial or economical development, or technological advancement, because 20th century has seen so many modern technological innovations. The research was taking place. Research is being carried in each and every field of human life. Research and new technological innovations both are complementary to each other, and we have seen the tremendous advancement in technology, in machinery, machine related productions, the trains, aeroplanes, invention of aeroplanes. At the same time, there are scientific development. So these developments has brought tremendous changes in the modern man's life. That is what it's a progressive term. So given on this description that I have just mentioned, it is essential for the students to learn and to understand the term modern literature. Modern literature, when does it started? We don't have any fixed boundaries or deadlines, so we can. It is at the same time one of the most scintillating aspect of literature to study the modern literature, because modern literature we have tremendous and variety of different forms. So modern literature hints at the modernity, the social modernism, again another term that comes up, that is modernism. Modernism is a movement. It's a movement of, say, all segments of human lives. Modernity has influenced, brought the changes in the lives of each and every aspect of human life. And it hints at the phenomenal change in the very best base of the society. It's an awakening. It's like an awakening. So when does it started? It's difficult to answer this question. Many of the literary writers, historicists, researchers are hinting at that modernism started not in 19th century or 20th century, but modernism started in the era of Elizabethan age. Means it is in the 16th century, or some of them believed it is in the 15th century. Modern literature hints at the modernism, the rational type of thinking. So, what has brought these changes? It's a radical shift from the earlier, say, socio-political conditions of the era. At the same time, it's another, in the way, in technologically speaking, it's another term that we use through scientific study, scientific research, new innovation, new technological innovation, new research has brought tremendous advancement in the modern literature, in modern era. And when does it started? But broadly speaking, we can include from the Renaissance period. But modern literature, it hints at the modernism. Modernism has been adopted by so many writers, so many practitioners, and these practitioners and literary writers who acknowledged, who imbibed the facets of modernism in their life, in their, say, so called influences, impressions, and driven by modern features, they tries to propagate some of the symptoms, some of the features of modernity in their respective literary expressions, whether it's poetry, whether it's novel, whether it's dramas, any kind of say forms of literature that they are familiar with. Why the author writes literature is another difficult aspect. But in another paper, literary criticism, you will understand that the literary criticism hints at some of the theories, and these theories are very much important, essential for the students to learn, to diagnose how the author comes to writing. There are so many facets, there are so many aspects that you will find in literary creation of the author. So, driven on these features, modern literature is going to be there. When does it started? Is difficult to answer this question, but broadly speaking, Victorian era is the preceding era to the modern age. Victorian era is one of the uphill, one of the difficult to express. Victorian era, we have so many movements that comes up during the Victorian era. Victorian era is said to be the dark age of the British history. Why so? Because we have seen there are industrial revolution that has taken place in Europe, the Victorian era. There was tremendous output of the industrial production. Many people were rendered jobless due to loss of job due to use of machinery that has been brought. People were struggling to earn their livelihood for their food. The livelihood is the sole task the Victorian people or the people from Victorian age lived for. There were so many appeals, so many sad and degrading social conditions that the Victorian era has seen. So Victorian era is one of the darkest era in the British history. There are so many beautiful novels that are written during this Victorian age, brings us the testimony of the hardships the Victorian people lived in. Charles Dickens' Hard Times, David Copperfield, Great Expectations are beautiful novels that brings out the realistic picture of the Victorian social conditions, industrial revolution, and what are the impact of this. Another novelist, John Galsworthy, Thomas Carlyle, at the same time, one of the Prime Minister of England, has written The Two Worlds. So these novels brings out the realistic picture of Victorian era in the preceding age. The drastic influences of these social conditions on the verge of 20th century modern literature has brought the drastic, say, conditions on the verge of modernism. There are psychological novels in 90s, 1890s. William James and Henry James in the Victorian era brought a book called Principles of Psychology. psychological novel, the human mind become the subject, the heated topic for discussion among the researchers. Psychological research that was taking place during this age, the people were very much enthusiastic that the human mind, human behavior can be studied scientifically. And this psychology has emerged by Sigmund Freud's research, thorough research, and uh, followed by Henry James. We have tremendous influence on the psychology, uh, tremendous psychological things. Okay. At the same time, when we study some of the psychological writing, we do not have Henry James as the first or innovators, but there are some kind of a psychological writing that has been written by Richardson in his famous novel Pamela. Over the history, we have some type of a psychological type of writing that has been given by the subjective writers or romantic literature is somewhat expression of the self soul. At the same time, we have very deep expression in John Donne's poem, but we can't call them as psychological writing. But the use of stream of consciousness, use of interior monologue, the characters are psychologically presented. At the same time, psychology brings out the objects and images that carries the thoughts and minds of the moment are given certain kind of a meaning, so they become symbols in the novel. Another advancement that I have just told you is scientific discoveries. Scientific discoveries are imagined science upon the society, science fiction, science literature embedded or centrally with the science. The characters are embedded or connected with the science laboratory experiments. The plot is devised in such a way that science or lab or the experiments are at the center. Characters are either scientists, as I told you, the experimenters. It's kind of an advancement in science that they wish to explore. Science has brought new technological innovation. Sometimes it's an imagined space, sometimes it's an exploration, or it's a kind of a time travel into the future. Sometimes, given on the imaginary type of writing, the characters are extraterrestrial lives. It's an imagined world, utopia, or sometimes it's a dystopian. The examples that on the verge of modern age, we see the Star Wars, Matrix, H.G. Wells, Robert Louis Stevenson, Aldous Huxley are the major prominent science writers. Modern age, as I told you, has seen the uprising. Okay, 20th century means from the beginning of the 20th century, the literature has brought the contemporary time, the new, innovative, and certain changes that are presented. And World War, the First World War and the Second World War were major incidents in the modern age. The First World War from 1914 through 1918 has brought catastrophic chaos in the European lives. World War has brought the displacement, migration of the people across the boundaries. It has rendered so many social problems, political problems. It's a kind of a of new, drastic, innovative thinking. It's it's definitely going to be winding and rewinding of the feminine point of view. Women were given some kind of a vocal uh, voice. They are preparing for their assertion, their points of view. They wish to explore on the opportunities in the male-dominated world. And French Revolution, the revolution that were taking place around the world, were the inspiring source for the female point of view to explore the opportunities in the male-dominated world. So the feminine point of view is not the modern say features that we see. Then World War has brought the disasters, bomb explosions. There are so many incidents that has brought the phenomenal change, metamorphosis in the social thinking, disasters, disillusions. What are the world? What are the world uh, holding policies? What are the philosophical basis to the modern age? It is very difficult for the European people to think about. It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma of living. It's a dilemma of philosophy. It's a dilemma of moral issues. So, what were the moral issues? The relationship has gone wayward. It's fragmented. It's broken. The very much basic of holding people together has gone wayward. It's fragmented relationship, even in the family, even in the society, and in European nations. So the questions were raised on the basic philosophy of the Western world. Each and every nation felt that the Western philosophy is no longer valid, no longer useful for the future to hold these so many nations together to see humanity together. And this has brought the the Eastern the Eastern philosophy into prominence. The members, the political think tank, the philosophers of the modern age were thinking that only the Eastern world, the literature that is produced in the Eastern world, the message that the Eastern world has given to the Western world is peace. And peace is useful. The philosophy that is expressed in Vedas, Upanishads, Gita are going to be useful for the Western world, and it was reflected in T.S. Eliot's Westland when the poem ends with Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. It's a universal message of a peace that T.S. Eliot advocates at the end of the catastrophic Westland. Then modernism stands for the loss of human values, the confronting nations. dominance, the competition, the race for dominance. So it stands for the rise of, say, the power, the authority, and the power thirst that we see in the dictators like Hitler has brought the world to the disastrous end in the Second World War, First World War, and Second World War. So, what are the moral and allegorical things the modern world has produced? It is essential that the politics of the era is reflected in very beautiful novels, political novel, and we have very allegorical novel in the form of Animal Farm, and this very beautiful novel written by George Orwell is very much useful for the students to understand the political disillusionment that we see. Then there are other features of modernism. Existentialism is one of them. About human existence, existentialism stands for the human existence, nature of human existence. It's a kind of an investigation and meaning of being. The human beings are forced to look at their own existence, to investigate the meaning of his own life, his own ideology. He stresses that people are entirely free, therefore responsible for what make of themselves. The stresses that people are useful for their own being, for their own actions and deeds and whatever results that are. The results may be good, bad, results may be profitable, or the results may be unfathomable. So every individual has their own individual existence. The analysis of this unfathomable freedom and choices has brought the rational type of thinking and rational decisions. There is nothing that the human being can do. He is responsible for his own deeds. There is, at the same time, the rational decisions has brought the the complicated human feeling, and it is whether to believe on God or not. The human being who suffered turns to God, as only God is the only way to embrace the existence. It's a absurdity of human being. He failed. He is definitely a suffering being who is forced to face the life hurdles, suffering, and death. Death is inevitable. Death is certainly going to come. And under this existentialist writing, we have very prominent writers in the form of Fyodor Dostoevsky, Jean-Paul Sartre, Knights. Knights has portrayed a very beautiful picture of, of the human being. So, with few more features that we have studied. Uh, it is we have to assume that the literary world, at the same time the social world, has brought tremendous changes in the human thinking on the verge of modern age, and it stands for the modernism. Modernism is not just a movement of few people. It is it's a conglomeration. It's a large entourage moving in the particular direction. The entire European nation, European society, community is moving in this direction, and it stands for a movement. It emerges as a movement. So, at the outset, in a very simple way, we just have to understand what does it mean by modernism. There are so many facets and so many aspects to this particular term, but we had to go through some features of modernism, how the historical conditions of the time, what are the driving features for the modernism, what are the features basically that comes under the elementary term that is modernism. There are so many aspects, so many things that we need to discuss still on. The features are there, the, the literary features, some of the social, political background, historical background that we need to see. At the same time, there is a change, a drastic change in the way the literature is produced. At the same time, how the literature is received also by the readers and spectators in the form of drama. Literature brings us very close to the conditions of the time, as I told you. So, literature needs to be studied when it occurs to the study of particular era. Literature is a hint to trust, to understand the particular times. So, that is what we had to understand. Literature brings us very close to the modernism, and we hope that by studying modern literature, we will more closely understand the literary text or modernism in detail. So, with these words, uh, there are so many features that we are going to study in our next lecture in continuation. Thank you.